Hello. So this is an example of a non-planned video, but I've just been looking through the metro and I read with shock but not surprise about a high-profile crime that took place. I think it was last year, and the results of the sentence. I'm not going to read out the whole report because it's a little bit long, but um, basically the report is about the former ambassador to the US, Sir Christopher Meyer. He suffered a vicious attack on the London Underground, and the thug responsible has been spared jail. Spared jail. Now, this is the rationale for why the defendant was spared jail. He showed remorse. He showed remorse. Um, at Uxbridge Youth Court, the defendant hasn't been named for legal reasons, 17 years old, which I think is a travesty. District Judge Deborah Wright said the injuries were quite clearly horrific. The assault has had a profound impact both physically and emotionally. I'm not surprised. The man could have died. Apparently, what happened was there'd been an altercation, and Sir Christopher Meyer was in this altercation with this yob, and then the boy, then 16, lost his temper and rushed at the ex-diplomat, pushing him from behind with both hands. Sir Christopher fell to the platform and lost consciousness before being taken to hospital, where he stayed for 6 days. Now, the photograph that was circulated in the media is harrowing. You know, it shows a man covered in blood all over his face on the hospital bed. This was a vicious attack. Now, on this occasion, the defendant may well have shown remorse, but if we're going to have a situation where all a defendant has to do is say, "Oh, I'm very sorry, it's terrible, I should never have done it," to escape jail, then are we going to have a situation where people are murdered and all the defendant has to do is say, "Oh, I'm very sorry"? It may be sincere, maybe on this occasion that's sincere, but I still think he should face a custodial sentence because a man almost died. It cannot be right that simply showing remorse is enough to get away from a custodial sentence. And it makes my blood boil when I see the phoniness of judges. If she was really serious about what she's saying, then she would have issued a custodial sentence. Just another example of a weak, useless judge. He was handed a 12-month intensive referral order owing to his good character, and told to pay 500 quid income. 500 quid for almost costing a man his life? 500 quid, that's nothing. It shouldn't be about money. It should be about the nature of the offence. And I've just written a very heated email to the Sentencing Council, which is the body in England and Wales that makes sentencing guidelines, because I think there's two problems here. Number one is weak, useless, incompetent judges, and number two is the Sentencing Council. They're both as guilty as each other, because judges will say that they issue sentencing within the limits that the Sentencing Council gives them. But very often they won't go for the maximum sentence. And that's clearly the case here. The Sentencing Council, their guidelines are way too lenient. I mean, when the Tories came to power 9 years ago, you know, they've always claimed to be the party of law and order. But have we seen more serious crimes resulting in appropriate justice? No. Time and time and time again, we see evil, destructive crimes resulting in a tap on the wrist. And it makes my blood boil. It really makes my blood boil. And I think what's happening here is we do have a problem with overcrowding in prisons, but that then leads to the situation where judges think, oh, well, there's overcrowding, so we better not jail people. That's absurd. That shouldn't be the premise of judgment. That shouldn't be the premise of justice. The answer should be build more prisons. And I know that it wouldn't be cheap. I know it would be controversial, but it can't be any more controversial than the current situation. And you know, it wouldn't be an easy thing because people will complain if there's a prison near them. Quite frankly, if there was a prison near me, as long as it was secure, I'd have no problem with it. As long as it was secure. I'd be all for putting prisons in remote areas, the Highlands of Scotland, the Pennines, somewhere where, they'd be away from people. Why not? Let's seriously look at that. And it would provide more jobs because you would then employ more people in the prison service. It would ease pressure on current prisons, on staff, on inmates alike. And for, the liberal school of thought, well, actually, that's good for inmates because it eases the stress on them as well. Rather than having five people in a cell, you have three in a cell, two in a cell. But you know what infuriates me? The laws that be, the authorities know damn well that the law abiding victims of crime, that the law abiding public, in most cases, are not going to take the law into their own hands. So I think the authorities are content with members of the public being furious about this because they know that other than expressing anger, people aren't going to do much else. I honestly believe we need something akin to a revolution in this country when it comes to criminal justice. We need a situation where victims come first. And I must admit, my whole life, I've found it very difficult to keep patience with people who make excuses for serious crime. By serious crime, I'm talking about violent assault, I'm talking about arson, I'm talking about rape, I'm talking about child kidnapping, child murder, those sort of crimes, and premeditated murder. I think murder in self defense is more complicated, but those sort of crimes destroy lives. And Britain is not the most dangerous country in the world. This is not Honduras, this is not Brazil, but clearly the last few years we have had a rise in violent crime. And I think one reason for that is because thugs think they'll get away with it. They get complacent. I mean, our capital city, it's tragic to see what's happening. And the likes of the Green Party will say, oh, it's all down to poverty. It's everybody's fault. It's the government's fault. It's the fault of the police. It's everybody's fault except the thugs themselves. That's a mentality that absolutely infuriates me. And quite honestly, I don't trust myself. People with that sort of mentality, I would have to leave the room because I would lose my rag. I really think that people who defend criminals, there's something seriously wrong with them because they don't understand. They can't grasp what that is like. They cannot grasp the mental anguish that victims of serious crime go through. I'm not talking about crime that, oh, once I got my bike stolen, that's a nuisance. It's stressful. I'm talking about, for example, people who are living in inner city areas and they're being terrorized on a daily basis. They're frightened to leave their own homes. We need a situation in this country where thugs are so scared of justice that they think twice about ever committing crime again. At the moment, criminal thugs laugh at the justice system because when you have a situation of someone knifing someone else and that issue that results in a community sentence, there was another example of that recently. A machete wielding thug got just that, a community sentence. I mean, a community sentence is utterly meaningless. It is utterly meaningless in those sort of crimes. I think community sentencing should be reserved for shoplifters. Um, and I don't think there's any such thing as a trivial or petty crime because even minor crimes can add up over time and destroy the quality of life. These sort of crimes, this sort of yob culture that we have in this country, it destroys the fabric of life. Quality of life infractions, which was the terminology used. Um, I know that, for example, Rudy Giuliani has his critics in the United States, but I have some sympathy with the broken window approach. Crack down hard on so called minor crimes and scare the big time criminals. I don't think that's the only thing that reduced New York City's violent crime levels. I think there was a range of factors, but I think it's one of them. At present, we have a mayor of London who is more interested in virtue signalling than justice. Um, I I just feel so. This is one issue I must admit I that really gets under my skin because when I see evil, destructive crimes resulting in basically a tap on the wrist, it's just a travesty. It's just that, and I really think there is something seriously wrong with these judges. If they lived in the real bloody world, if they could see, if they could experience what victims of crime go through, they would not be issuing such weak, pathetic sentences. It makes my blood boil, to be quite honest. So I think we need to do several things. I think there needs to be peaceful, some sort of peaceful revolution. I don't know what form that would take, but there needs to be a concerted effort to put enormous pressure on the sentencing council. It used to be called the sentencing committee, the sentencing council. There needs to be far more public pressure put on them, immense, to the point where they are forced to change their ways. I think there needs to be more accountability for weak judges. I think the public should be empowered to get rid of weak judges. I'm not necessarily talking about voting for judges because I can see flaws with that. I'd considered that before, but then you'd have a problem where, for example, in an area with a high Muslim population, you'd have Sharia courts, and we don't want to go down that line. But I do think that where you have judges issuing time and time again weak, useless sentences, those judges need to be held to account. You know, we vote politicians out of power, so why shouldn't there be a situation where judges are held to account? For example, if they have a consistent record of sentencing that just doesn't match the gravity of the crime, then they face, losing their position. And I'm talking here peacefully. I'm not talking about violent retaliation. I'm not talking about vigilante justice either, because that has flaws. But if this situation continues, we are going to see anarchy in this country because law abiding members of the public will have had enough and they will get so sick of it that we will see vigilantism. And I don't want to see that because vigilantism sometimes results in innocent people being caught up. It's not the way forward. But people are so sick and tired of the situation. Um, I mean, the Conservative Party, they talk about being the party of law and justice, but we have a justice secretary who calls for more lenient prison sentences. He calls for fewer women to be imprisoned. David Gauck actually called for that. Why should a violent woman get any more lenient treatment than a violent man? I think that's fundamentally wrong. So I don't know. I really think that we need to see judges more accountable. There is at present a situation where you can have sentencing reviewed, but it's overly bureaucratic. It rarely results in a satisfactory outcome, and I don't think it's accessible. I've looked at the website, it's like a maze. You have to go through a dozen different links. It really isn't straightforward. I think the justice system needs to be far more clear. Now, obviously, justice is a complex subject. I mean, legal legal terminology and so on. And I want to be very clear here. I believe in due process. I believe defendants have the right to a fair trial, etc., etc. But what we do not have in this country is a situation where heinous crimes result in anything like the sort of sentencing that they should result in. I mean, this is not about revenge. It really, really pisses me off when liberals and the left, those who sympathise with criminals, when they say, "Oh, but prison is revenge." No, it's not. No, it fucking is not. It's just justice. It's just fairness. Revenge will be doing exactly the same thing. So it really pisses me off when people say, "Oh, but you want revenge." No, I don't. Well, maybe I do, but most victims of, mental anguish is a totally human trait. So yeah, I'm sure if someone has had their child murdered, of course they'd want to do the same thing to the offender. But what at the very basic thing they would want is justice. If someone is a victim of violent assault, at the very least, they want to know that the person responsible isn't free to terrorize other people. That is not happening at present. And I really feel disgust at these. idiot judges, these judges who don't live in the real world. I want to see them named and shamed. I want to see them scrutinized peacefully. I'm not talking about any sort of vigilantism, but they should be under the same sort of personal pressure that politicians face. Why not? Politicians are in a position of power. We hold them to account. We can vote them out at the ballot box. Why shouldn't judges be under some sort of similar scrutiny? Why not? Why not? That needs to change. By God, if I ever get into a position of power, I will do everything I can to start changing the direction of this. We need a situation where, for once, there is real justice, because at present it's very rare. And I am not talking about the flog. Critics will say, "Oh, but you want to just flog him and hang him." No, I want humane conditions in the prison. Give them food, give them exercise. What you cannot have is a situation where someone violently assaults a total stranger, or let's say acid attacks. That is an evil, destructive crime. Where I'm coming from here is anger. I'm not going to lie. I feel incredibly angry about this, but it's also compassion. It's compassion for victims of serious crime. And I know for a fact that victims of serious crime cannot get any closure unless they see real justice. Now, real justice isn't going to bring back the loved one or change the scars on their face. No one's suggesting it does, but at the very least, it's about basic fairness. And that's what the likes of the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats don't understand. They just don't grasp that it is about fairness. This is probably the main reason I left the Liberal Democrats. I was affiliated with them for about 5 years, but over time I thought I'm a hypocrite if I stay in this party. They're not as extreme as the Greens, but they do have a school of thought which is basically, oh, it's all down to poverty. And these poor criminals are slashing someone across the face because it's all down to poverty. I think there's a lot of things that we can look at. I think drill music needs to be banned. These sort of evil, toxic influences that you get with gangs in London and Birmingham and Manchester. We need to really start reversing that situation. Things can be done, but they are not being done because, frankly, there's weakness, and this situation just has to change. Now, some will say, oh, but prison alone won't solve the problems. No, but common sense dictates that if a violent person is behind bars, that is safer for the public than them not being behind bars. People say, oh, well, it's a university of crime. Well, there's a lot of things that can be done for prison reform. So, yeah, focus on prison reform. But the idea that prison itself is a problem, if we copy the Nordic model, not only that would be perverse, but it wouldn't work in this country because you would have literally evil thugs laughing because they get to roam the street free. It's utterly, I see sort of two extremes. I don't want a situation like Southeast Asia where you get prisons overcrowded and you just have loads of rapists and drug addicts and people just throwing in together. Clearly, that isn't right. Or like the United States where you have a massive gang culture within prisons. But I am also incredibly critical of the Nordic model, which is basically it treats criminals like they aren't criminals. I think that's complete horseshit. I think it's completely. I mean, people always say, "Oh, but the Nordic states have low crime levels." That's dubious, actually, because there's a lot of ways that they record crime that is not necessarily reliable. So I'm not convinced by that. But even if we allow for the fact that there are comparatively low crime levels, okay, well, what about the those victims that do exist? I mean, for once, I'd like to hear from a Norwegian person who's had a loved one murdered, how they feel about the soft justice system. I mean, and I'll round up here. Anyone who thinks that a thug who throws acid in a woman's face should avoid prison, they need their head examined. I'm talking about the Green Party. The Green Party, if they had their way, they would abolish prison. They're a bunch of extremists, and as bad as the current situation is, it would be even worse if they were in power. So as you can tell, I'm being upfront here. I have very strong views on this subject, and that's it. It's not going to change. Um, and that's okay because my strong views are sincere. It's good in a way, it motivates me. But I'm aware that this isn't going to change overnight. I am not saying that punishment alone is the answer, but punishment is a central part of justice, and anyone that thinks it isn't doesn't understand justice. They don't understand the principle of fairness. If you think there should be no punishment in justice, you don't believe in fairness. By definition, you are pro criminal. And I think it should be a public statement be pro criminal. Because there are people in this country who cannot leave their own homes, and it sickens me to the core.